It started with something small, not a scandal, not a public meltdown, just a missing photo. But in the royal world, nothing is ever just anything. At Clarence's house, where everything from the arrangement of flowers to the tilt of a picture frame is calculated, someone noticed the change. A familiar wall, once holding portraits of George, Louis, and Charlotte, now had a gap. George still smiled in his school blazer. Louis was frozen mid-laugh. But Charlotte... gone, quietly removed, no replacement, no explanation, and that silence ironically said the most. To most people, it would have looked like an interior tweak, maybe a stylistic refresh. But if you've lived in those halls, if you know the politics that bleed through the wallpaper, you'd recognize it for what it was. A message. The portrait in question wasn't just some school photo. It was a carefully selected image from Charlotte's 8th birthday. Blue dress, eyes sharp, smile confident. That picture was part of a broader visual narrative Catherine had curated over the years. Subtle reminders that the Wales family wasn't just holding the monarchy together, but reshaping it. Charlotte's inclusion mattered, especially beside her brothers, especially in a house Camilla now called hers. Staff didn't speak up at first. You don't survive palace life by chatting about portrait placements. But one housekeeper, Eleanor, had been around long enough to know when something wasn't right. She remembered watching Charlotte dance through the halls of Balmoral in rain boots. That little girl meant something, and Eleanor knew exactly who gave the removal order. Queen Camilla. Camilla didn't shout. She didn't send a formal memo. It was tea-time diplomacy, the kind that cuts deepest. One moment she's stirring her Earl Grey, the next she's gesturing towards Charlotte's frame with a flick of her wrist and saying that one doesn't suit the tone of the room anymore. The staff heard her, they always do, and within hours the portrait was packed up and quietly taken down. Now, here's where it gets personal. Back at Kensington Palace, the mood shifted the moment word got out. It wasn't gossip, not yet. Just a soft murmur from Clarence that reached Catherine's ears. She didn't react outwardly, but anyone who knows her knows she doesn't forget. Charlotte was her firecracker, bold, charming, and full of questions. This wasn't just some decorative change. It felt pointed, and she knew William wouldn't let it go. William returned home that evening and listened as Catherine laid out what she'd heard. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even speak at first. But his jaw clenched, the way it always did when something touched a nerve too deep to name. This wasn't about aesthetics, it was about control, about legacy, and he recognized the move for what it was. The same kind of quiet erasure his mother had faced decades ago. Later that night, while the kids were asleep, William stood alone in his study staring at an old photo of Diana holding him as a baby. He remembered how easily she was pushed out of view, how her image had been removed from spaces like Clarence's house in the name of transition and peace. Now it was happening again, only this time it wasn't Diana, it was his daughter. He made a decision right there. No press release, no staged response. But Charlotte would not be the next name quietly deleted from the palace story. Camilla had made her move. Now it was his turn. And this time, the narrative wasn't going to be rewritten without a fight. William didn't wait for permission. The next morning, his private secretary received a clear order. Find out exactly who authorized the removal, when it happened, and who carried it out. No stone left unturned. In royal circles, that kind of internal audit wasn't normal. But this wasn't a normal situation. It wasn't about politics, it was about blood. And William wasn't letting it slide. Behind palace walls, tension brewed. Camilla sensed it. Everyone did. William's silence wasn't indifference, it was precision. When he finally showed up at Clarence's house, there were no photographers, no aides, just the man himself. Calm, composed, and carrying a storm beneath his tailored coat. He walked straight past the ornate hallways, through rooms soaked in decades of quiet power plays, until he found her. Camilla looked up from her papers, surprised but not unprepared. William didn't sit. He asked one thing. Why was Charlotte's portrait removed? Camilla held her teacup with that same poise she'd perfected over years of court training. She gave the usual line, design adjustment, tone of the room, nothing personal. But William wasn't buying it. His voice dropped steady and sharp. George George and Louis are still there. This wasn't a design choice. This was a decision. Camilla tried to maintain her calm, but the truth hung heavy in the air. She had always known how to play the palace game, when to smile, when to step back, when to subtly reshape the narrative. But she'd underestimated what Charlotte meant to William. She is not decor, he said. She is not to be erased. And with that, he turned and left. One sentence, one look, and he was gone. But what he left behind was louder than any headline. At Adelaide Cottage, Catherine was doing what she always did, holding the emotional line. Charlotte hadn't noticed the missing portrait yet. She was still giggling in the garden, braiding daisies into her doll's hair, blissfully unaware of the war being fought quietly in her name. Catherine wasn't going to let that change, but she felt it. The sting, the reminder that no matter how far they'd come, there were still pieces of the past trying to crawl their way into the future. She didn't cry, not in front of Charlotte, but later with William, she let it out. Not through tears, but in words spoken in a whisper. "She's a child," Catherine said, "and they treat her like she's in the way." William pulled her into a hug, one hand on the back of her head like he was shielding her from the weight of it all. "She'll never be in the way," he said, "not while I'm breathing." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Catherine slipped into her office and opened a drawer filled with Charlotte's drawings. Castles, crowns, endless hearts. She found one photo, the birthday portrait that had been taken down. Holding it gently, she scribbled a note on the back. "You belong everywhere they try to remove you from." Meanwhile, Clarence House buzzed with a quiet shift. Staff began whispering about an upcoming reinstallation. The same conservator who had once wrapped up Charlotte's portrait was back, this time with a new frame, gilded, larger, more commanding. It wasn't returning to some side hallway. It was going up on the grand staircase, front and center, a place where no one could miss it. Camilla saw it. She paused. She didn't say a word, but she knew this wasn't just a portrait anymore. It was a warning. The portrait gleamed beneath the soft lights of the grand staircase, not tucked away in a side corridor, not masked as an afterthought. It stood taller than before, wrapped in gold trim, the plaque beneath it clear and undeniable. Her Royal Highness Princess Charlotte of Wales, daughter of legacy, light of the future. The message was carved not just in brass, but in intention. Visitors noticed. So did the staff. The reinstallation hadn't come with a press release or statement, but it didn't need one. In a family where decor is diplomacy and hallway decisions are acts of war, this was a declaration of presence. Charlotte hadn't just been put back, she'd been elevated. Word spread quickly through royal channels. Aides whispered about how the reframe came directly from William. There had been no debate, no consultation, just a decision, and that decision had been respected. Some said Clarence House had no choice. Others said it was the quietest checkmate the monarchy had seen in years. Camilla passed the staircase that afternoon, her heels soft on the marble. She stopped for just a second. Not long enough to look suspicious, but long enough to feel it. There was no anger on her face, no smugness either, just stillness, a quiet acceptance that something had shifted. She didn't comment, but everyone nearby noticed how she didn't smile the rest of the day. At Kensington, Charlotte sat curled on the couch with her legs tucked beneath her. Catherine had told her in simple, loving words that her picture was back up at Clarence. Not the politics, not the drama, just the fact. Charlotte blinked at her mom, confused. Why did they take it down? Catherine hesitated. Maybe they forgot how special you are. Charlotte frowned. Did Daddy tell them? Catherine nodded. He reminded them. Charlotte said nothing for a while, then grinned slightly. Can I draw a new one? With my crown this time? Absolutely, Catherine smiled. Make it big. That drawing, Charlotte in a tall crown with butterflies at her feet, went straight on the fridge. The real palace. In William's private study, beside a black and white photo of Diana holding him as a baby, sat a copy of Charlotte's portrait. Not for show, not for politics. For him, a silent promise. He'd seen what silence could erase. Now he was determined it would never erase again. There was no public comment from Camilla, no soft denial in the press, but insiders knew. Her influence had been checked, and it hadn't come from scandal, tabloids, or public outrage. It came from a father who understood legacy better than anyone else still breathing in that castle. It wasn't just about Charlotte. It was about Diana, about every woman who had been quietly moved out of frame to make someone else feel more comfortable. It was about Catherine, whose grace had been mistaken for silence. And it was about the future, about ensuring the next generation of royals would never question where they stood or how much they mattered. The portrait stayed up. No one touched it again. Charlotte kept drawing. Her next sketch was of a tall staircase with golden frames lining the wall and a little girl waving from the center. She titled it, "This is where I go." Catherine pinned it up next to the others and whispered to herself, "Yes, baby girl, that's exactly where you go." Because legacy isn't built in silence, it's defended in moments like this. When someone refuses to let you be forgotten, even when the room tries to forget you. And in that palace of polished wood and rehearsed smiles, one father had drawn his line, and the frame was never empty again.